Hello, and thank you for tuning into the New Orchard Show. Let's be honest, something is not working in mainstream education. Despite this show being quite new, I've already published a couple of interviews probing this subject matter, notably Classical Education episode with Jonathan Healy and Ken Buzikos, published in October 2024, and more recently Diagnosing the Educational System with wonderfully erudite Kevin Donnelly, published in February 2025. I'm not hiding it. I desperately want to understand how can we improve status quo in education and make better use of mountains of money the state is currently pouring into the system. Despite record levels of funding, declining student performance has become a global concern. In Australia, literacy and numeracy scores have been falling for 2 decades. According to the latest PISA results, Australian 15-year-olds are now years behind their global peers in mathematics, science and reading. Beyond the numbers, many families are sensing a deeper loss, a disconnect between education and meaning, between learning and character. The factory model schooling system, designed for efficiency, not individuality, often leaves little room for wonder, wisdom, or moral development. Increasingly, parents are looking elsewhere, and many are discovering an alternative that's both ancient and surprisingly relevant: classical education. Rooted in the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, this time-tested model has cultivated thinkers, leaders, and reformers for centuries. But how does it fit into modern secular Australia, and how can it meet the needs of today's diverse families? Enter Classical Conversations, a global movement that's reimagining education by placing parents right where they belong, at the center. As my guest today, Cheree Harvey, puts it, Classical Conversations is an organization that equips and supports parents to homeschool. It equips through a carefully curated curriculum and guided resources, and it supports by training local leaders to build weekly communities, bringing families together to learn, grow, and wrestle with big ideas in a shared space. In just a few short years, Classical Conversations has taken root across Australia and New Zealand, creating a growing grassroots network of families who want more than just test scores. They want truth, beauty, and purpose. Today we're going to explore what makes this model so incredibly powerful and what it takes to run against the grain of a deeply entrenched system. From pedagogy to parent-led learning, from challenges in a secular framework to real stories of success, we're going to dive deep. And there is no better guide for this conversation than Cheree Harvey. She's a country coordinator for Classical Conversations in Australia and New Zealand, a passionate educator, and a homeschooling mum who's lived this journey from the inside out. Let's dive in. To start, I'd love to find out from you what inspired the founding of Classical Conversations, and how has the vision evolved since its inception?
I would say that the main answer to that question is there was a need. The need in this situation was a good education, one that points to God as the creator of this marvelous world, and also a community to do that with. So Classical Conversations was founded by Lee Bortons, and she is in the US, North Carolina. And like all good stories, this one starts at home. So she was actually trained as an aerospace engineer, and she decided to take a higher calling and stay home to raise her boys. And because she had a very active mind, like a lot of new mums, she was really turning her attentions to learning how to educate her children well. And also, her husband and her take seriously the authority that God has placed in a parent's hands of raising up a child in the way he should go. So she was researching classical education. She realized that the education system had sort of deteriorated from the one-room schoolhouse that it used to be. Back in the day, they would be run by a teacher who was only 16 years old. And there was a few months of the year. And then the children that came out were very literate, very well-rounded students. So she was questioning, why do we go through 12 plus years of education and not be able to impart any of that on anybody else? So that is one thing that led her to put her hand up to run a high school class in her house once a week for other families who are of the same opinion. And so that was a space where children had thoughtful discussions, they practiced asking questions, they enjoyed debate, history, science, logic, and more. And then during the rest of the week, they would prepare for that next time that they met together. So that evolved into the program, which we know as Classical Conversations today. and it incorporates all levels of school now, ages 4 to 18, and it has a structure, training, leadership, and curriculum creation. And so, because of that approachability, it has spread around the US and now the world. And thousands of families meet weekly at local communities to support and encourage each other with an organized curriculum and a shared vision to know God and make Him known. So the answer to that was there was a need, and this lady put her hand up to meet that need, and it's snowballed from there.
Meeting a need, that's so beautifully simple. Please talk to me about the pivotal moments in the group's history that led to its growth and success globally and in Australia as well.
I think that the answer to that question is quite similar as well, because it's been meeting a need. Was a growing homeschool present in the US, a presence, and a revival of classical education, which allowed CC to find its niche in equipping the everyday parent to know how to do the big task and that they weren't alone. So in Australia, I have inquiries weekly about classical home education, what it is, how can I do this at home, what does it look like? So in Australia, the first classical conversations group began as two mums meeting in their garage with a desire to teach their children with a classical Christian pedagogy. And so, although we're still a small representative on the Australian scene, we currently have communities in Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, and Tasmania. And we also oversee our cousins in New Zealand. So it shows me that there is still that need globally for equipping and support for families homeschooling.
I'm curious to hear your take on what has happened in mainstream education. You've used the word need a few times already, indicating that the mainstream education establishment has somehow failed to meet that need or to service it in a way that satisfies parents. This did not happen from year to year. There was a fairly long build-up to this current state of play. I'm just keen to hear your thoughts on this matter.
In this world, we have entropy, so we might have started out with a higher standard and things have gone up and down, really. But in the post-Enlightenment time, we have this focus on science as God almost. And so families are seeing that the political climate has changed. Things are in the schools are just not the way that they should be. That we're not just teaching how to spell, how to add, the stuff that we should be learning as foundational skills. We're not teaching that. We are expanding and teaching things about sort of agendas and you can be whatever you want to be, things that are not concrete. And, there's a sort of a need for people to want to take ownership of looking after their children and raising them up to know God without the sort of secularized world trying to tell them their worldview as if it's not a theory, but the truth. And so, yeah, there's a lot of needs in that. When I say need, I think the need is that parents know that they're trying to do the best for their kids and raise them in a Christian home, but they don't know exactly how to easily access education for their kids because, like I said, with that mention about the one-room schoolhouse, we're not in that time period anymore where we're being taught the basics at school. And then when we graduate and have a family, we can then say, oh, I know how to teach you addition, subtraction, how to diagram a sentence. I know that. I know how to walk you through that because I did it before. We're graduating and not having any idea how to do those basic things with our own little kids. And so I think that's the need. It gives those things back to parents to say, I can learn this and I can teach this to you. This is accessible.
I want to ask you about the classical education model implementation in Australia. How would you say it's been received here, and how does it differ from its implementation in other countries?
The classical education model is still fairly new in Australia, where we are now in the grassroots stages. And so we are in the process of trying to find each other around the country, whoever is aspiring to educate this way. We're beginning to communicate, set up events, etc. There is a clear need amongst the Christian homeschooling community for this way of educating. And like I said, that's through the pattern of inquiries I'm receiving, that there's an awakening of people who want to educate better. And with CC specifically, each country, when it's established, they're asked to work on their own country's history and geography, so that can be reviewed and added to the primary level. So that's a difference in implementation in multiple countries. And as classical conversations has grown and expanded far beyond the US, there are also adjustments being made in the curriculum to incorporate more global and country specific texts regarding things such as literature. So the implementation of a day to day meeting might be very similar, except it would be in some other country's language if it wasn't in Australia. Yeah, that's the differences and similarities.
Let me ask you about community. Obviously, community as a part of the educational process is absolutely essential. How are classical conversations communities structured in Australia? And what role does leadership within these communities play at a local level?
Classical conversations communities are structured the same all around the world. That's one of the things that makes it unique. That's actually built into the organization. So there's a clear structure for each community meeting, like each weekly meeting, and for each role within that community. And so those are the boundaries, helping the families to know what to expect on a day, and also to help the leaders know what to be working towards. So the structure for all of classical conversations is there's a director who manages the administration for the group, and tutors who the director licenses to run the classes with the kids. We meet once a week for 24 weeks for primary school, 30 weeks for high school, and everyone in leadership is a parent in that group. As I mentor the directors, they mentor the tutors, and in turn, the parents in each class are mentored and shepherded. And in that way, we bear one another's burdens and work together to create a true community. Now, I am in touch with all of these other people across the country who are teaching classically in schools, or who are looking to do something classically. And so there is a wider network that I, as Classical Conversations representative, am sort of in touch with, trying to grow, but that's a separate part.
People in the audience who are listening to this will likely want to know, how is the curriculum adapted to reflect the local history, the local culture and context, while maintaining its broader foundational roots?
So each country, as I said, when it's established, is asked to work on their own history geography, and that gets put into the primary level, the morning class, which we call foundations. But the beauty of classical education, though, is that it really is a way of learning and thinking. It doesn't just depend on one type of text or content. One of classical Christian education's goals is to help each other learn to think wisely. So we can do this, for example, by questioning a text carefully, asking what it's about, defining the terms, character, theme, and asking what questions about why this decision was made, how to impact future decision or events, what was happening at the same time elsewhere, is this a reliable testimony? So all of those thoughtful questions are what we want to instill in our children as a way of learning about the world and thinking clearly and truthfully. And that does not that's something that we have in common as humans. That's not relying on one cultural tradition or one historical context.
Looking at Australia, the makeup of society is changing at pace. It would appear that people are mostly secular these days. Obviously, we have these shallow neo-religions promoted by the political class which have permeated the society, but when we think about the traditional religion, it's not quite visible on the surface, the way it used to be a few decades ago. So, accounting for all of that, how does Classical Conversations balance its Christian foundation with its broader educational goals as well as growth?
Classical Conversations is first and foremost Christian, as well as classical and community. And that is something right from the very top. As in the US, more and more schools crop up or places crop up that say we're classical. Classical Conversations really, really keeps pushing and promoting all down through the leadership and through their communities that we are Christian. And so that is a hard line that we stand on. All of the directors and tutors, the leaders of all the local communities, are Bible-believing Christians who adhere to a statement of faith. That is one of my jobs as country coordinator. I train and license those directors yearly. And part of the training that I impart is to learn how to form a local community who can uphold that same statement of faith, and to know that in community we will be learning about all subjects which are made by God and are held together by Him. So we pray in our communities, in our training, in all our meetings, because without God, we would have no reason to be pursuing these high goals of training our children in fear and admonition of the Lord. So the motto is to know God and to make him known. And that is the belief of ours is the entire goal of education. So how can we learn about God, speak to others kindly, wisely, and winsomely about him? And to learn about him, we must study the beautiful riches he's placed in this world to find. And to share about him, we must be in community with others and work out our sanctification together. So regardless of what society is doing around us, how many are Christian, non-Christian, etc., we're really drawn together because of what we believe. And so if somebody comes and sees that, that's amazing. They can see this wonderful thing that has been created by God and be drawn in or have a conversation. But that is what we stand for. And that's how we're modeled.
I love that you have such clearly defined set of principles as an organization. You know what you want and you know where you're going, and that's that. I want us now to focus on how all of it works. What training and resources are provided to parents to really empower them as primary educators in this model?
There are a lot of training and resources. So beyond curriculum books that we use, there's also an online portal which is updated often with suggestions, guides, videos, etc. for the parent to delve into weekly at their own pace. So CC knows that the parent is the teacher of the child. And so CC allows the parent to structure what a week looks like at home, but has many resources to be accessed and used to get the most out of community days. So not only are there specific curriculum helps, there are a lot of books and resources to help parents learn how to teach, what it means to teach classically, etc. And CC is really focused on helping the parent teach classically, teach well, and to know what that means without taking the authority out of their hands.
And how does the program address different needs of students with different learning styles and abilities? In this day and age, the medical industrial complex tends to diagnose kids with hundreds of different conditions because it has a very potent incentive to do so. Mainstream education celebrates the so-called neurodivergent categories. Is that accounted for in CC as well in some way?
I would like to say yes, because during community day, if you have a group of 8 kids and they're all different, the tutor is adjusting accordingly. I have tutored quite a few classes and I have 3 children and they're all different ages and they are all different amounts of loudness or need a different amount of movement. However, I am always thinking ahead. Okay, I've got these kids in my class. These ones are restless, so let's do a lot of activity, etc. So our primary levels are designed to be active and hands-on. We don't want to sit all day at a desk. We sing and move because they're 2 tools to help us memorize, and that's a core habit for any human. And in the higher school levels, the power is all with the parent to work with the students' abilities and their schedule at home. While we don't shy away from hard things, we do know that we are finite and have limitations. So there are a variety of ways to scale down or even scale up the work depending on the ability of the student.
Can I ask you to elaborate for us on how the trivium, so grammar, logic, and rhetoric, is integrated into the programs at different age levels?
Sure. So all of us as humans will flow through each of the stages multiple times, often in the same day. For example, I am still at the grammar stage with my maths this year as I learn terms I have never heard of before and see diagrams I couldn't even imagine. However, we do know that children often practice different stages of the trivium more at different ages. So the first level of the trivium, grammar, is the vocabulary in terms of any subject. So that's the naming that we need to level up on any skill at all. And all of primary level in CC meets in the morning for a foundations class. And that class focuses on new grammar in a variety of subjects. So we have history, maths, science, English, Latin, geography, and timeline. We're going to use song, movement, games to help kids begin to recognize, say, and appreciate the sentences. And then when the kids are getting a little older, in years 4 to 6, they can attend essentials class, which is in the afternoon. And this class covers explicit grammar instruction, math games, and writing instruction. And in this time, they're still learning more grammar, building on what they have learned in foundations, but they are also being taught how to ask questions, which is the early stages of the logic or dialectic. In the beginning of high school, this is still the skill being most heavily taught as the children read different books, study different places in the world, learn how to create a science experiment, etc. They're being shown the 5 common topics, the ways to question anything, to see how this fits with that, compares if it is true, etc. They're still creating papers, but they're only just beginning the invention levels. And so when they're older again, they have had more years of good books, life experience, challenging questions. They have enough tools and they have a desire to create something that is theirs. They are challenged to study harder texts, bask in the words of Shakespeare, think hard things through algebra and calculus, and begin to create their own math problems, poetry, debates, and research projects. And that is the last sort of stage of the trivium, which is rhetoric.
Before we started recording today, you've mentioned that you don't yet have any graduates that we could talk about as specific success stories. But I still would love to ask you about the results and success stories that you're aware of, as obviously you are deeply embedded in the CC global community, if I can call it that. Are there any measurable outcomes you're aware of observed in students who have moved through this model?
Yep. So I've heard stories because I am country coordinator. I've heard them through other countries. And I've spoken with a lot of other families elsewhere, studying with classical conversations. And they've had students that have been so well equipped to study further things, enter the workforce, or have families with integrity. So some stories that come to mind are the student who was struggling at university because she felt out of her depth in her anatomy subject. But then she was able to step back and think on how she approached new information in her CC community and work her way through the grammar and pass her subjects well. The current CEO of Classical Conversations is Lee Borton's first son, the guinea pig of CC. And then I just today heard a story about it was a family in America, and the children had been signed up to some science community classes, and they came home telling their mother, we know so many things because of all of these things that we sing in class in the mornings. And so she's been able to proudly say, look at all this work that my kids have done, thinking it was nothing, just fun and games. And it just has come out in their ability to mature and to approach everything. So there's so many more. There's some in the online catalog of families around the world who have testimonies of how CC's helped them learn more about their creator and through the world he has created. So I would really want to outline that it is the measurable outcomes personally would be things where the kids were able to see where they could do better and level up rather than just earn a certain amount of money or get a job in this particular area.
I've had the pleasure to interact with classically educated kids, and in my somewhat biased opinion, they were all quite impressive. There was just something different in their confidence levels and how they interacted with adults. Anyway, moving on. This model of education that you're presenting to us today really can involve the entire family. So are you able to tell us how have families benefited holistically beyond academics from participating in classical conversations?
Yes. So having a community supporting you and surrounding you is a huge holistic benefit. Knowing who to turn to when you have a parenting question or a curriculum question or any sort of advice, true community creates that space. And having a place to come with clear expectations of what's happening on this day, and that we can have friends as homeschool parents, not just to help our kids, but ourselves in this long journey, that is an invaluable benefit. And it really offers that in a community. You can come, unlike in a school, you can come and you can have friends for yourself to help you through this journey. And it is like a family extension.
That is very cool indeed, because finding like-minded people is actually not that straightforward. So having access to that is a massive win. I think ever-present technologies has sort of conditioned our minds to go at things alone in the first instance, instead of seeking help or breaking the burden into parts and sharing these parts with others. There is a noticeable discomfort when people do reach out for help. In my opinion, this really lines up with how people react to homeschooling. There is this total overwhelm or a sense of impossibility of even attempting to do something like that. Parents who have gone through traditional mainstream systems are very much aware of the volume of material one has to process to pass this and that exam and qualify for X, Y, and Z, but they are rarely aware how little of that material they themselves truly understand, remember, and use in their day-to-day. And they give you this look like you've gone completely mad. They ask me if I know physics or chemistry or biology in any meaningful detail because they clearly don't. But at the same time, they don't see that they have received hundreds of hours of instruction in physics, chemistry, and biology, yet they don't really know anything about these categories of knowledge. And at the same time, they're willing to pay top dollar for their kids to go through exactly the same cycle, which will get them to the exactly the same result. It's really interesting to observe that. And in all of that, it's just so clear that the role of community is completely misunderstood.
One thing I really liked that I heard at a meeting recently was the reiteration that God knows we are finite. He's infinite, not us. And he's given us these limitations, and it is a blessing to be within these limits. And that means we can help each other. If we do it all alone, then we're saying that we are infinite. Or we are saying, one other thing is that we are God. And our kids are not going to benefit from us deciding that we're just as good as God. Like, God has a role in this as well. He is the one who inspires our minds to even learn.
All right, let's pivot a little bit. What challenges do you face in promoting classical education in a predominantly secular and mainstream schooling environment?
I think that in the mainstream environment, so many people inside that system know that it doesn't produce good fruit. I think the challenge for us as classical educators and classical homeschoolers is to be faithful and to find places to share what we are doing and explain it well. And then God will send the people who are truly seeking change in their children's education. So, my personal challenge is to keep pressing on and being a voice for those who are listening.
What would you say are the biggest obstacles to expanding classical conversations in Australia? And do you have any strategies or plans to address that?
A big challenge or obstacle to expanding is that it's parent run. So that comes with blessings and challenges. If everybody wants a community to exist, a local community, but nobody wants to put their hand up to do the admin or someone else to run the class, then the community doesn't get off the ground. So I guess we have to have patience in that sort of situation. So homeschooling in general and homeschooling with high goals and expectations is a matter of sacrifice. We must sacrifice things like our paying jobs and our time in order to spend it with and on our children. So the uh, a good size group could be small. It could be simply two families doing things together, but they have each other's back. And then somebody else comes along and they are able to integrate that other family. So there's no goal of we have 60 kids per community or anything like that. It's more like praying and carefully reaching out to those around you, and whoever sees it and hears it and wants to take a hold of it and join in wholeheartedly, that's the sort of person that you bring into your group. And it's, you're going to sort of see if it grows too fast or if it grows without people understanding the benefits and the responsibilities of a community, then it is going to fall apart when one person leaves who was running the admin or something like that. So that's the obstacle, but also the blessing, because God provides all the good and perfect gifts. So having a big community, having a small community, doing community or doing classical conversations, even on your own, because some people do that, that is still a blessing from God because we get to teach our kids at home.
The one big complication that I'm mindful of is that our system of governance in the West led to a situation where both parents need to be full-time employed to service the mortgage and car loan, as well as just being able to afford a relatively good lifestyle. At least that is the dominant narrative that most people will align to. Homeschooling will involve some kind of sacrifice from parents, some set of compromises and concessions. Do you know what is the percentage of parents who are homeschooling their kids and consequently working part-time?
There are, in certain areas, certain cities and things, a lot of parents who are working part or full-time online or something, as well as homeschooling. I know in Sydney there is a big homeschooling community and most of those parents are actually working. And so they bring their kids to a group, but they're on the computer or something like that, actually trying to make ends meet. And so that really is a big system of juggling. I think in the Gold Coast region where I am, there is probably a half and half. There's probably half the parents or the mothers who are staying home with the kids are doing some form of part-time work to bring some money in order to support that. And even, or they're downsizing. And in order to afford, not that the books for classical conversations are extremely expensive, but you don't want to give your children the smallest amount of everything. We always want to give our kids the best books we can find, or if there is an opportunity that they do need to take on, say there was a sports opportunity or something like that, we don't want to shortchange our kids. So there are still financial costs. And so some people are either downsizing or limiting how much they do in order to fund homeschooling.
I'm really keen to hear your take on this next question. How does the organization plan to adapt to changes in education, technology, and societal needs while staying true to its classical roots? I'm particularly interested in the technology component of this question, as these are changing insanely fast. 2 years ago, even a year ago, large language models tools were kind of present on the fringes, a little novelty with interesting predictive powers, but now these tools are being applied to absolutely everything. And the promise is that these large language models will revolutionize education and finally move it to the 21st century. What's your take on this?
A really great explanation that I heard recently was that in order to teach your kids, you only need, I think it was 4 things. You need paper, a pencil, books, and your time. So we are sort of going to steer clear of all of the lovely AI things out there. We are going to stick to our books. We're going to have as many resources online for people globally, and also in countries where they can't access physical copies of their books and things like that. We've got all that sort of thing that we want to cover, but we want to make sure that we're equipping that parent to then teach their kids. We're not equipping the kids to learn how to manipulate AI to write an essay, that sort of thing at all. Where this year, in fact, my oldest is in high school, the first year of high school, and one of the about 10 weeks of the year, she has to do a research paper on a different topic. And I have said, not that she uses AI, but I know the perils of the internet. And I have said, you may write your paper, but you may only use the books that we own. And so she is so happy with that decision because she also knows the pitfalls of just uninhibited screen time and online time. So she is like, yes, that's a great idea. I do want to just be limiting myself to something within the range of what we have at home. And that is sort of the way that we balance being classical, as well as there is technology out there. We are aware of it. However, the problem with the technology that's coming is more like it's not teaching us how to think. Just the same with the calculator. We could put the numbers in a calculator instead of doing it on paper with our pen, but that's not taught us to think at all. And if we don't even know what to input, that's not even helping us. That's even further behind. So we don't want to have kids who are unable to think, even to ask a particular question to get a result that they need. So we're wanting them to have not a struggle, but we want them to be in the real world and ask real questions to real people and of real books. And so that's where we sort of stand firm. However, we still use the internet while we can with our online PDFs and things like that to help the parents do stuff at home.
So use the technology, but stick to the basics.
Yeah.
Very good. Can you explain for parents in the audience who are asking questions about mainstream public or private education and are starting to feel that sinking feeling and wondering, what is the alternative path? How can they get on board with classical conversations and start their own journey of discovery? How can they get in touch with you and book a consultation? How should they go about it?
Usually I get all of the inquiries on the CC Australia website come straight to my inbox and I respond to those, often with a generic email to give them some further information. And then if they have more questions, they can specifically ask them after that. And either there or the US website, I will also get inquiries from that directed to Australia. So emailing me is an easy way to get onto me. And my main goal really is to help people connect to each other and find each other. So if there are a few families in the same location, I'm able to connect them. And then they can start having those conversations about how do we do this thing? Should we homeschool together? And that sort of thing. And then another thing that I found really helpful, and it's repeatedly been helpful to multiple people, is The Core, which is a book that Lee Bortons wrote. And it is not only aimed at homeschoolers, but it's aimed at all educators, parents and teachers. And it's about the basics of a classical education, but it's calling us to ask, why do we want to teach our children this way? Should we be teaching our children classically? And it really, it's like a call to mission. And I find it really impactful for all sorts of groups. If they're thinking about what do we do with our kids' education, that's probably a good place to start.
I'm going to put all the links and your contact details into the show notes so people who are interested can easily get in touch. This was a fantastic introduction to classical conversations, and I'm so glad you are out there doing what you're doing with conviction and such clear principles. You are a part of a wonderful organization. I'm sure a lot of new parents who listen to this today will be interested in exploring it. Thank you very much for your time today, and hopefully see you sometime in the not too distant future. That's it for today's episode of the New Orchid Show. I hope you found this conversation with Cheree Harvey as thought-provoking as I did. We've covered a lot: what's broken in the mainstream system, the ancient roots of classical education, and how classical conversations is helping families reclaim their role as the primary educators of their children. In a time when education is often reduced to metrics and bureaucracy, it's actually quite refreshing, maybe even radical, to hear about an approach that places virtue, truth, and community back at the center. Whether or not classical Christian education is the right path for every family, its resurgence speaks for a broader hunger for meaning, for beauty, or for something more enduring than the latest educational fad. To learn more about Cheree's work or explore how to get involved, head over to classicalconversations.com.au. If this episode resonated with you, consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And if you've got a moment, leave us a review. It really helps others discover the show. Thank you very much for tuning into the New Orchid Show, where we're planting ideas for better future. See you next time.